Tiffany Henyard, once hailed as the super mayor of Dutton, Illinois, now faces a stunning downfall, shocking both her devoted supporters and the harshest critics. Henyard's rapid descent from a local political powerhouse to a controversial figure has been both swift and dramatic, clouded by a series of allegations ranging from reckless spending to questionable leadership decisions once considered an unstoppable force in local politics. Henyard's reputation has crumbled under the weight of accusations. Reports reveal that funds earmarked for public services were instead redirected toward personal indulgences, including extravagant parties, first-class travel, and luxurious hotel stays. While Henyard defends these expenditures as necessary for official duties, critics argue that they highlight a more significant issue: her apparent mismanagement and disregard for the financial struggles of Dutton's low-income residents, who rely on the very services she is accused of misusing beyond financial misconduct. Henyard's polarizing leadership style has sparked further outrage. Accusations have surfaced that she filled her administration with unqualified loyalists, transforming her leadership into a personal fiefdom rather than a public service. Henyard's clashes with the town's board over budgetary decisions, along with her appointment of a police chief who did not meet legal requirements, have fueled further resentment. Critics describe her behavior as a display of stubbornness veering into arrogance, deepening the dysfunction in the town, with basic services in disarray, streets in disrepair, and public trust in local governance at an all-time low. Despite the turmoil, Henyard's loyal supporters continue to stand by her. They argue that her troubles are a result of a politically motivated campaign to discredit a powerful female leader. In their view, her opponents, lacking the charm and influence to compete, have launched a coordinated attack to undermine her through legal challenges and public smears. However, as more evidence emerges, from ethical violations to misuse of taxpayer funds, it has become increasingly difficult for Henyard to maintain her narrative of victimhood. Dutton is now deeply divided, with passionate supporters defending her and equally fervent opponents calling for her resignation. Henyard's refusal to take responsibility for her actions, coupled with her combative rhetoric, has alienated many and further intensified the town's polarized atmosphere. The fallout from her leadership has left Dutton grappling with financial instability, operational chaos, and a growing lack of confidence in local governance. Yet, some argue that this collapse may pave the way for much-needed reforms in the town's leadership as investigations into her administration continue and calls for her resignation grow louder. Henyard's ability to weather the storm and restore her tarnished reputation remains uncertain. Will she rebound and prove herself a resilient leader, overcoming adversity? Or will her political career be forever marked by scandal and broken promises? Echoing her meteoric rise to power, Henyard's time in office has been turbulent, and the conclusion of her political journey now seems as abrupt as her ascent. The latest political drama unfolded in Thornton Township, where Henyard, who also served as a township supervisor, spearheaded a major shift in the way nominees were selected for the 2024 election. For the first time in decades, the township opted for a caucus instead of the traditional primary election system. This move was intended to solidify Henyard's political power, but an unexpected procedural error during the caucus process led to her disqualification, severely damaging her political aspirations. The caucus, held at the Homewood Flossmoor Park District Auditorium, drew hundreds of residents, many braving the bitter cold to witness the high-stakes political event. Illinois State Senator Napoleon Harris, who also chaired the Democratic Committee in Thornton Township, presided over proceedings. What followed was a tense, charged atmosphere, with Henyard supporters and detractors gathering to witness what many anticipated would be a pivotal moment in local politics. When the results were announced, the mood in the room shifted dramatically. Harris secured the Democratic nomination, while Henyard's disqualification triggered an outburst of applause, cheers, and even jubilant reactions from those who opposed her. The scene quickly devolved into chaos, resembling more of a political prize fight than a typical town hall meeting. Henyard, visibly stunned by the outcome, issued a fiery statement accusing the caucus process of being deliberately manipulated to prevent her from securing the nomination. She claimed that Harris and the Democratic Committee had rigged the process against her. Some viewed Henyard's accusations as a desperate reaction from a politician whose career had already been tarnished by controversy, while others questioned whether her charges held any merit or were simply a last-ditch effort to save face. Despite Henyard's claims, Harris remained composed and focused, defending the caucus process as fully legal and in line with procedures used in other Illinois municipalities. He emphasized that while the switch from a primary to a caucus was a break from tradition, it was not unprecedented and was entirely consistent with legal electoral procedures. A debate over the legitimacy of the caucus process sparked broader conversations about electoral fairness, the balance of power within local government, and whether the shift in procedure was an attempt to manipulate the political landscape in favor of certain individuals. Harris's victory, securing the Democratic nomination, represented a significant turning point in Thornton Township politics. Henyard's political future now seemed uncertain, and the contentious nature of the event left many residents and political observers speculating about its long-term impact on the township's future. Harris's triumph solidified his position as a powerful political figure in Thornton Township. But Henyard's dramatic fall has raised important questions about leadership, ethics, and political strategy in local governance. Her disqualification from the caucus, alongside her tarnished reputation and growing legal challenges, may ultimately mark the end of her political career, or at the very least, signal a profound shift in the township's political landscape. As the township moves forward, the aftermath of Henyard's downfall could lead to a reevaluation of how local leadership is chosen, how public resources are managed, and whether the political establishment is truly serving the needs of the community. For now, Henyard's fate hangs in the balance as investigations continue, and calls for her resignation grow louder, leaving Dutton and Thornton Township at a crossroads in their quest for reform and recovery. The fierce rivalry between Tiffany Henyard and her political adversaries had only just begun. The dramatic events of the evening, combined with the fierce accusations and intense reactions from both sides, underscored the high-stakes nature of local politics in Thornton Township. This moment would not only reshape the political future of the township, but also serve as a defining point in Henyard's turbulent career, with her disqualification now a focal point of heated debate and State Senator Napoleon Harris securing the Democratic nomination. It was clear that the clash between the two was far from over. The showdown had evolved into a broader political battle that would play out in future elections, leaving many wondering whether Henyard's defeat marked the beginning of a larger conflict or the final chapter of her career. In a shocking turn of events, Henyard, surrounded by a few of her most loyal supporters, stormed out of the Homewood Flossmoor Park District Auditorium after her disqualification, exclaiming that the process had been mishandled. She accused Harris, the chair of the Thornton Township Democratic Committee, of overseeing an unfair and legally questionable procedure. Her outburst wasn't just an expression of frustration. It was a defiant declaration against what she believed to be a deliberate attempt to undermine her. The caucus vote that evening, widely considered chaotic yet decisive, ended Henyard's tenure as the Democratic candidate for Thornton Township supervisor. This public display of anger and accusation revealed the extent of the division within the local political landscape, amplify her already controversial reputation as one of Illinois' most divisive political figures. Henyard's camp claimed that the caucus process had been rigged to exclude her supporters, particularly the elderly and frail, who had been unable to participate due to changes in the rules at the last minute. However, Harris and the caucus organizers defended the process, stating that it was fully compliant with Illinois law and that the decision to hold a caucus was a lawful tactic used by other townships despite her removal from the Democratic ballot. Henyard showed no signs of surrender. She hinted at a potential bid as an independent or even a right-leaning candidate. Such a move would likely fracture her already divided base of support, but also demonstrated that Henyard wasn't going down quietly. This defeat, however, underscored the mounting challenges she faced, not only due to her controversial leadership as Mayor Dutton and Supervisor of Thornton Township, but also because of the growing legal and political threats that loomed over her career. The fallout from the caucus, which many of Henyard's supporters viewed as a political ambush, highlighted the increasing polarization surrounding her. Her critics, emboldened by her defeat, began to portray it as emblematic of her failures as a leader, failures that were further magnified by the ongoing allegations of corruption and financial mismanagement that had plagued her time in office. Public outcry was palpable, with many residents voicing their dissatisfaction with Henyard's leadership, which they believed had harmed rather than helped the community. Social media erupted in criticism, with calls for her removal gaining significant traction from many. Henyard's downfall was the inevitable consequence of unchecked ambition and authority. Her supporters accused her opponents of stifling the vote and manipulating the caucus procedures to suit their interests. Yet, Henyard's refusal to take responsibility for her actions only further eroded her credibility. Months of speculation surrounding her leadership style, financial misconduct, and self-serving policies painted a picture of an administration more concerned with enriching itself than with addressing the community's needs. Her failure to unite her constituents and restore faith in the government deepened the mistrust among residents, leading many to believe her time in power had come to an end. The situation marked a significant turning point in Henyard's political career. She now faced the daunting challenge of redefining her identity under the intense scrutiny of both her critics and her once loyal supporters. Despite her fiery defiance and the unwavering loyalty of her core group, It became increasingly clear that Henyard's political future was hanging in the balance. The outcome of the caucus had become more than just a political loss. It had served as a symbolic end to an era marked by controversy, resilience, and increasingly strained public trust. Her supporters, once steadfast in their belief that Henyard was a leader Dutton and Thornton Township needed, began to question their faith in her. Many of her once strongest allies, disillusioned by the mounting scandals and ethical violations, began to distance themselves from her. Henyard's combative, us versus them rhetoric alienated the very people who had supported her rise to power. The electorate, once enamored by her promises of change, now saw her as a symbol of political complacency, arrogance, and inability to deliver on those promises. Henyard's policies and competitive attitude toward criticism, which once earned her praise for her boldness, now fueled growing resentment. The public, particularly in the aftermath of her disqualification from the caucus, felt increasingly isolated and betrayed by her leadership. Her repeated refusal to engage in meaningful dialogue with the community about their real concerns only deepened the divide. As public dissatisfaction grew, Henyard's leadership was viewed less as steadfast commitment and more as stubbornness. A refusal to acknowledge the realities of her administration's failings, what had once been a hopeful promise of change, now appeared to be nothing more than a facade. Allegations of excessive spending, a lack of transparency, and failure to address the pressing issues facing Dutton and Thornton Township added fuel to the fire. Henyard's leadership, once characterized by a sense of power and control, now seemed increasingly detached from the needs of the people. The gap between her government and the community it served had never been wider, and with every passing day, the calls for accountability grew louder. Henyard's failure to adequately address the financial mismanagement and deteriorating public services, which had long been a point of contention, only served to highlight the shortcomings of her leadership. Her refusal to address these concerns head-on, instead opting to double down on her defensiveness, alienated both her critics and supporters alike. The damage to her credibility was irreparable, as residents no longer trusted her to represent their interests in the wake of the caucus and the intensifying scrutiny of her administration. It seemed that Henyard's political career was in its final stages. What had once been a meteoric rise, fueled by the faith of her constituents, had now become a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and political power. Her failure to bridge the growing divide between herself and the community painted a stark picture of a leader who had lost touch with those she was meant to serve. The defeat in the caucus, far from being just a symbolic loss, had come to represent a tangible rejection of Henyard's leadership style, her refusal to take responsibility for her actions, and her inability to restore public trust. The voters had spoken, loudly and decisively, and the message was clear. The people of Dutton and Thornton Township were ready for a change. Henyard's era of political dominance, once built on resilience and bravado, now seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by scandals and unfulfilled promises. As the fallout continued, one question remained. Would Henyard be able to rebuild her political career, or had the final chapter of her leadership already been written despite the collapse of her political standing? Tiffany Henyard and her staunchest followers continued to challenge the legitimacy of the processes that led to her downfall. Holding on to the belief that the system had been unfairly stacked against her, Henyard's supporters refused to accept the outcome. To fully understand Henyard's spectacular decline, it's essential to look at her rapid rise to prominence and the carefully cultivated persona that had once made her a rising star in local politics. With her ascension to mayor of Dalton and supervisor of Thornton Township, Henyard initially garnered recognition as a visionary leader. Securing two influential positions solidified her status as one of the most prominent figures in local politics. Her dual authority, coupled with a blend of strength and vision, seemed to position her as a capable and transformative leader. But as her power grew, so did the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. The contrast between Henyard's growing influence and the financial struggles of the very people she was elected to serve became a significant point of contention. One of the most damning allegations that emerged was the revelation of Henyard's extravagant spending, including a staggering $33,000 charged Amazon for community purposes in Dalton. This was particularly controversial because many of Dalton's residents earned below the median income of $50,000, with some struggling to make ends meet. The discovery of such lavish expenditures, coupled with Henyard's growing distance from the daily struggles of her constituents, fueled mounting outrage. Residents who had once trusted her leadership now felt deceived and betrayed. As one resident put it, "It's disgusting that she's living like a queen while we can barely get by." These accusations painted Henyard as a leader more focused on indulging her lavish lifestyle than addressing the urgent needs of her community. What had once been framed as responsible leadership and fiscal prudence quickly became a story of financial excess and mismanagement. The growing disparity between Henyard's actions and the needs of her constituents only deepened the disillusionment among residents. As the reality of Henyard's mismanagement became undeniable, a groundswell of discontent took hold, amplifying calls for accountability. The mounting scrutiny not only damaged her reputation, but also served as a stark reminder how far her leadership had strayed from the principles of integrity and service she had once espoused. What was once seen as financial decisions in support of a broader vision for the community were now viewed as emblematic of deeper hypocrisy, revealing the stark contrast between Henyard's public persona and her private priorities. A revelation of Tiffany Henyard's alleged financial mismanagement caused a significant erosion of her base of support, marking a sharp shift in public sentiment. Many of her early supporters, who had once seen her as a beacon of hope for bringing about change, began to reassess their views. Her leadership, once heralded as a symbol of professionalism, was now framed as a tale of greed, mismanagement, and self-interest. The person who had once been seen as a transformative figure became, in the eyes of her critics, a cautionary example of unchecked ambition. Her fall from grace was a direct contrast to the promises she had made when she first entered politics. What had once been framed as visionary leadership now seemed to have devolved into a pursuit of power for its own sake, leaving her constituents to bear the brunt of her actions. The charges against her only cemented her reputation as a controversial figure with unrealized potential. Her political demise served as a stark warning about how the pursuit of power, when left unchecked, can alienate and deceive those one is supposed to represent. Henyard's leadership, once hailed as potential catalyst for positive change, became a tragic example of how power can corrupt. Her actions reverberated far beyond her immediate circle of influence. Residents of Thornton, disillusioned and disgruntled, found themselves increasingly vocal about the wasteful political squabbles that had seriously impeded their ability to access essential services. Critical projects were postponed, and public services deteriorated. The focus had shifted from addressing community needs to a political tug-of-war. This shift in priorities further emphasized the growing disconnect between Henyard and the residents she had sworn to serve. Whether Henyard's actions were driven more by personal ambition or a genuine desire to serve her constituents became an increasingly complicated question. The charges against her only fueled calls for a more humble, accountable form of leadership. Her bid for supervisor of Thornton Township, underlined by these mounting scandals, reached a dramatic climax when she abruptly left the campaign after just 7 minutes. This decision exacerbated the financial stakes of the ongoing political battle. According to Stephanie Wheatman, the failure to secure the necessary permits and approvals could cost the community $40,000 and further jeopardize essential projects, illustrating the high financial risks involved beyond the political maneuvering. The larger issue was that taxpayers might be forced to repay funds already earmarked for the community's improvement. With important projects stalled, risks escalating, and community conflict intensifying due to Henyard's tough and controlling management approach, the fallout from her actions had become impossible to ignore. Although Henyard had not been formally indicted, the ongoing FBI investigation into her administration represented a significant blow to her political influence. This investigation only worsened her standing in the eyes of the public, further tarnishing her reputation and making it harder for her to salvage her political career. Her once loyal inner circle was beginning to fragment as well. Staff resignations raised concerns about growing internal dissent, and longtime allies reportedly began moving on. The investigation had further eroded Henyard's credibility, and her critics were quick to point out her failure to lead effectively, further undermining public confidence in her abilities. In an attempt to salvage her political standing, Henyard posted a defiant video on Facebook. In the video, she questioned why she was receiving so much scrutiny and accused her critics of launching a smear campaign to distract from other pressing issues. However, this defensiveness only alienated the public further. Her refusal to acknowledge her shortcomings and take responsibility for her actions painted her as out of touch with the concerns of the very people she was meant to serve. Meanwhile, her political rivals seized the opportunity to highlight her leadership flaws. The ongoing debates and disagreements within her administration showed that she was under intense internal and external pressure. Every new incident, from stalled projects to increasing tensions with the community, only worsened her declining support. Raising the stakes for her political future, Henyard tried to shift public opinion by organizing local gatherings and engaging with the media, but these efforts largely backfired. Media outlets began accusing her of desperation, mocking her attempt to portray herself as a compassionate leader. As her political career crumbled, it became clear that her leadership had not only failed to deliver on promises, but had also created a legacy of distrust, disillusionment, and missed opportunities. The story of Tiffany Henyard's political demise would be remembered as a cautionary tale, What began as a promising career driven by ambition, strength, and a desire for change ultimately spiraled into a narrative of corruption, financial mismanagement, and personal failure. Henyard's inability to balance her growing power with the needs of her community, coupled with her refusal to take responsibility for her actions, sealed her political death. The fallout from her leadership failures left the community in disarray, questioning the cost of unchecked ambition and the damage it can do to both the political career and the lives of the people it was meant to serve. Thanks for watching Celeb News.